Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ and RJ TV. My name is Eric Lecain. We are talking about interesting stories going on around the world, and I am joined, as always, with my world traveler, Sir Dan Kang. Now, one of the questions we ask on this show, very important question, where in the world is Dan Kang? Now, I live here in the Philippines, and Dan is also based in the Philippines, but every week Dan is in a different place. So where is Dan this week?
Well, I am actually in the same place I was last week because it's like raining like crazy here, and I don't want to go anywhere right now. I'm back in Korea.
Oh, you're back in Korea.
Home base in Korea.
Home base in Korea, yes.
𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀. That's north of Seoul.
Okay.
So,
now you're north of Seoul. Does that mean you're not in North Korea?
No, I'm right at the top border of, 𝗡𝗲𝘀 is the new city. That's a little bit north of Seoul, just right at the border. Yeah, above, parallel to Incheon Airport, actually. But 𝗡𝗲𝘀, interestingly enough, was mentioned in the Marvel TV show where the Winter Soldier lost his arm. He lost his arm during a fight during the war, North Korean War, in a bar in 𝗡𝗲𝘀.
Fascinating. Fascinating. That is some fascinating stuff there.
I couldn't believe I heard that on TV.
Because I know now are you near when the bombs start flying? Are you one of the first people to get whacked?
Probably it'll fly over us to Seoul. The tanks will probably roll in to where we're at. But it's interesting you should say that because the roads here from going into Seoul, they all are built with like these overhead bridges, right? They're not even bridges; they're like gateway that are designed to be blown up and collapse. If, in fact, there is an invasion, the roads get collapsed and get cut off. It's really interesting you say that because I did not know this until recently, why they had all these concrete arches on the way going north, and that's one of the reasons. And there are these huge, like, concrete structures right next to my motorcycle shop, actually, and it's like this huge concrete structure along the side of the road, and it's like a hallway concrete tunnel, which is made as a gateway because when they collapse the road, there's only one way in and out, walking in and out, to pass through that area.
I love getting Dan Kang off on these tangents.
Yeah.
It's like stories. I know if I bring it up somehow, there's going to be some kind of story behind it. Yeah. But yes, well, that's what we are. We're with the World News Jam. We jam on all kinds of news stories. Yeah. All kinds of interesting things going on around the world, interesting things, especially world records. Now, Dan, one of the things I wanted to get to first today are world records that we do not want to see broken. Now, I was thinking about this the other day. What world record would I not want to see broken? First thing that came to my mind was, of course, how many live frogs can you eat in one sitting? Because, of the in Japan, they have the protest going on about the frog samishi. But also, most people killed in a deep sea submersible. Of course, that's one. Just thinking of things. I don't know.
Carbon fiber submarine goal before.
Carbon fiber submarines. But one of the things, records that we don't want to see broken, obviously, is the hottest day ever. Because the world right now, this week, there was some interesting news that came out through the climate records. As scientists are sounding the alarm, the likelihood is growing that 2023 could be the hottest year ever on record.
I think 2022 was the hottest prior, wasn't it? I'm pretty sure.
This is breaking.
I know we had the hottest in Korea. We had the hottest day in Korea, either 2021 or 2022. Yeah.
Because scientists are using words like extraordinary and terrifying and uncharted territory. Are using things to describe the current spike in global temperatures. This week, Dan, the planet's average daily temperature soared to the highest unseen in modern records. Those are records kept by the client agencies there in the U.S. and Europe. And one of the news programs said that it was the hottest day in 125,000 years.
Wow. What?
So I don't know how they would know that, but but that's what they're saying. That is a hot day. You know what's interesting, Dan? People I know, a lot of my friends who are Republicans, as you know, and they're saying, "Oh, the climate change is just a way for a lot of people to make more money. I'll see it when I believe it, or I'll believe it when I see it." Well, you can see it right now. It looks like it's happening.
Inevitably, it's going to happen. So, I think in Earth history, I'm pretty sure climate changed. So,
I mean,
do we have any control over that? Do we really have any control over that? Do we?
I think we might have had some control over it, but I think I think we're too late now. I think we've already blown our chance. I'm not sure.
Did we even have a chance? Honestly, like I don't know. I mean, that's where my question would be, really.
I mean, a lot of people are saying, I mean, like I said, some of my friends are saying, well, this would have happened anyway. And then there's a lot of people, especially scientists, are saying, no, this is, the temperature of the planet should not be what it is right now. And it is only that temperature now because of one thing. People. We did this. We made it this hot because of, the things that we do.
That would be inevitable too. What do we do? I mean,
we're riding around in our motorcycles with exhaust coming out of the motorcycles that are sold to us by Lecain Motor Shop, and that is the reason why the Earth is so hot. But Dan. This is not bad for everyone, and I was wanted to do this story for a while. That climate change is not bad for everyone. People, plants, wildlife, sea life, the polar bears. It's bad for a lot, but there's someone out there that this climate change is actually good for, and the question is, who is climate change good for? And the answer is mosquitoes.
Yeah, we love those.
Turns out, as the world heats up, it becomes more humid, obviously like it is today here in the Philippines. Mosquitoes are beginning to thrive throughout the world a lot more than they used to. In fact, mosquitoes love this climate crisis. It opens up a whole new world for them. There are new places that mosquitoes are popping up that they were not there before or ever. There are places in the United States that now have mosquitoes that never had mosquitoes before. There are places in the United States right now. We use the United States because it's very easy to check records, whatever. But there's things. There is cases of malaria in the United States right now. When's the last time you heard of malaria in the United States?
Wow. I think it's the worst in India or something, isn't it? I think malaria is like really bad in.
I mean, I've always thought of, every time I went to Africa, I always had to get the malaria shots. Which cause you nightmares. Yeah. This is crazy side effects. But right now in the United States, in Florida and Texas, there are cases of malaria. And the reason there are cases of malaria is because there are mosquitoes there that are not supposed to be there. And there are mosquitoes. Yeah, okay. There are mosquitoes in Florida and Texas. But usually, mosquitoes are born. They live for a little while and then they die. They die because the weather gets cold and they die. But right now, the weather is not getting cold like it did before, and mosquitoes are living a lot longer than they are supposed to. And while they're living a lot longer than they are supposed to, they are growing and they are multiplying more than they are supposed to. And as this hotter weather changes the rebirth process of mosquitoes, it allowing them to live longer. And part of the other issue is, as it gets hotter, people stay outside. People stay outside longer because it's hotter, and that gives a chance for mosquitoes to do what they do, which is, bite people. And it gives a chance for these parasites inside the mosquitoes to procreate more because of the extreme heat, and it allows them to, of course, infect more humans than normal.
Yeah, mosquitoes are spawns of hell. the mosquitoes here in Korea, they can bite you through your clothes. I never knew they could do that. They will bite you through your clothes, and that's actual fact. I never knew that. And that's never happened to me until I came here. The mountain mosquitoes up here are crazy. Yeah, mosquitoes are spawns of hell, man. They carry a lot of disease. They carry, Zika, I guess, and what else is going to come next?
Yeah, I mean, what a great way to spread a parasite. In the U.S., they showed that over the last 40 years, 70% of the places in the study that they did have become more hospitable to mosquitoes that were not supposed to be hospitable to mosquitoes. But the interesting thing is moving over to other countries where mosquitoes are not only annoying, biting you, but they're also very deadly, such as places like in Africa. Like I was saying before, every time I go to Africa, we got to have all these, malaria shots and so forth. But what's interesting about Africa now, mosquitoes have always been in Africa and there's always been malaria. But what is happening in Africa now is that mosquitoes are climbing. They're getting higher up. Mosquitoes stayed at a certain level, and now they're supposedly moving upwards 21 feet per year because the mountainous regions where it's supposed to be a little bit colder, where the mosquitoes wouldn't go, now they're going because the temperature is getting hotter. And the problem being is a lot of these places in Africa never had to deal with malaria or dengue before. And so now all of a sudden there's places in Africa that now have dengue that never had it before because the mosquitoes they're getting higher.
That's actually a concern where you're at right now as well, because, dengue, I've had dengue. I caught dengue in General Santos.
I mean, I live in the Philippines. I mean, this is something we deal with. We deal with all the time in the Philippines. I mean, the United States, I would get bit by a mosquito, a couple times in summer. In the Philippines, I get bit every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't have a mosquito bite.
Because even where I used to live on the 21st floor of a high-rise condo. And one thing that was really nice about living up there is in the summertime, there's no mosquito. There's no mosquitoes. The mosquitoes don't come up that high, typically.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't notice that until like the third month during the mosquito season. I was like, wow, there's no mosquitoes here. And I realized there's no insects up that high, almost none, because of where I lived, the wind and the elevation.
They don't like the wind. They don't like the cold. They don't like the elevation. They like to bite your ankles. I mean, they don't. That's where they are. But the interesting thing I found is I started looking into this story was that in Peru, they're actually having the worst outbreak in dengue ever recorded. 150,000 people got the disease last year. Wow. So this is because of the high levels of rain and the heat. And experts are saying it's only a matter of time before dengue hits the United States and Europe. Europe right now, as we've talked about on the show multiple times, is the fastest warming continent in the world right now. And they're saying that the mosquito population has grown there threefold. And that, in places like Europe where it's cold, 6, 7, 8 months out of the year, that's, all of a sudden now it's not. And so that it seems to be the biggest problem that they're worried about right now is that the mosquito population that's growing uncontrollably there in Europe.
Yeah, well, I mean, besides that, weather has a lot to do with the human psyche as well, moods. So maybe Europe, I don't know, because somebody tried to tell me a while back that in England they didn't have mosquitoes. I was like, what? I had to look that up. I was like, you're ridiculous. No.
They got mosquitoes there.
They don't have a lot of sunshine. But I guess that's going to change soon, huh?
They got yellow teeth and they got mosquitoes. So two lies that you can't get around in Europe.
It's like, what?
Right now, they're looking at China and India as being two of the hardest hit places in the world for climate change, and the fact that the mosquito crisis is becoming overwhelming to the point where they have to start thinking about something they're going to have to do especially in China right now, which is having huge problems there with the climate issues. They hit these ridiculous numbers last year, these plus 40-degree days that go out over like weeks at a time. And so I think, right now, especially in China, I think this is going to be a big deal because the government is talking about, how are we going to deal with the mosquito issue in the next couple of years, which, not to jump subjects really fast, but also in China, there's another thing that's killing you in China, which I read this story about, and the story was so unbelievable, I had to talk about it today because we talk about some weird stuff. But one of the things in China that will kill you is marriage. One of the big stories there that came out last week is how, in China, marriage can kill you. Recently, there's been a series of high-profile domestic violence cases in China, which included, where the husband kills the wife. And one of those, which was huge, which was blown up all over China, was this one guy who killed his wife. This circulated all over social media and sparked all kinds of outrage and reignited the debate about whether you should even get married in China, which we talked about, it was a couple weeks ago. We talked about how China's trying to figure out a way to get more people to get married because less people are getting married there. But what happened in this video was this man shows the video of the man driving over his wife, and he drives over his wife, and then he backs up his car and he backs over her, and then he drives over her, and then he backs over her, and then he gets out of the car to see if his wife is dead, and she's not dead. So he gets back in his car and he drives over her again, and then backs over her again a couple more times until finally he's done it enough times, which makes me wonder. I wonder what she said. What do you think she said to get him to drive over her so many times? But eventually he killed her. And this has turned out to be a regular occurrence there in China, especially recently. There's videos. Of course, this has been going on, I'm sure, for a long time in China. But the big difference is now that people have it on video. Yeah. Because it's not true unless you got it on tape. Or you got it on your cell phone. So this has been trending. The post in China: keep yourself safe by staying away from marriage and childbirth, which are the two things that China has been trying to get people to do more of, because China is now not the most populous country in the world because they have been shrinking. Because less people are having children and less people are getting married. And we went through this the other day, the reasons why, there's so few marriages happening now in China. But this is a story that just popped up, and I'm like, I got to talk about this, about the fact that domestic violence in China before was a family issue. You let the family deal with it. The police, the authorities, the government, they're not going to get involved. It's a family issue. And so now
culture, it is that way a lot. And it's horrible because it's been always an issue here as well, that the police, you call the police for domestic violence and they won't really do anything. Yeah. It's horrible. It's
better to have a fight, or be attacked by a stranger than somebody that's in your family. They're two different levels, two completely different levels in China. One is taken much more seriously than the other. And so, and the interesting thing is in China, as I did a little bit more research on this, that, it's part of the reason, they're trying not to grant many divorces there because they don't want people to get divorced. And they are saying about 1 in 4 divorce petitions, which were based on violence, have been denied. That are being, and the problem they're having, I'll get you to comment on this. The problem they're having is when a woman, applies for a divorce or sues for divorce because of domestic violence, the judge, because the government does not want to grant too many divorces, they don't want to be like the United States where everybody gets a divorce. They want people to stay together. The problem is when you don't grant the divorce, then the woman has to get home. She has to go home to the husband. Yeah. And of course, now it's worse. Now it's worse.
Yeah. that kind of explains it now, huh? You can't get a divorce.
I mean, there's a huge problem in the Philippines, which I've talked about numerous times, about the fact that they should have divorce in the Philippines because of domestic violence.
It's illegal in the Philippines. Huh? They don't grant divorces at all, do they?
No, there is no such thing as divorce there. They have a twisted version of the annulment clause, which is not even, annulment actually means that the marriage never happened, which, really means that, like within the first 60 days of the marriage, you can grant annulment. But in the Philippines, it's like, you can get an annulment after being together for 15 years, which makes no sense to me. But anyway.
Which explains why you never got married there.
That's why I never got married.
I have to rethink getting married there in the Philippines. I have to rethink this.
You got to get married in a place where you can get a divorce, just in case. I'm not saying that, you shouldn't. But I'm just saying that, this thing that's going on in China right now, which kind of like lends itself to things that are going on in the Philippines as well, is that they're making it much harder for people to get, divorces there because they want people to get married. However, with this new video that surfaced this week, people are going, don't ever get married ever because it's dangerous.
Well, there's a kind of a, in this country, there's kind of a social taboo about getting divorced. I mean, it's allowed and all of that. However, there is a kind of a social taboo that if you ever get divorced, you will never be eligible for remarried because, and it's just the way that you can almost say social bullying, but I don't know what you would even call it. But if you are like a divorced woman, female, you almost have no chance of ever being married or anybody ever even dating you again, especially if you have children as well.
Yeah.
So, and it's, that's just the social, it's kind of a stigma here. So, as far as not even allowing it here, it's almost, they're scared to even do it, So it has to be extreme for them to actually get a divorce. So, that's kind of not a great situation.
So we're not saying don't get married, but I'm just saying just realize
single guys here giving you
it's not as easy to get a divorce. I mean, get married in Las Vegas, where you can get married and then you can get divorced 20 minutes later.
Yeah, I got married in Vegas many years ago. Eloped. I knew her for 3 days. That's a whole different story. You can listen to me later and ask me about that story.
So we'll talk about the what losers me and Dan are here later. But first, we need to talk about other kinds of losers, especially when you're in an election. When you're in an election, Dan, and here we're jumping subjects here. When you're in an election and you back the loser, you're faced with looking stupid because you picked the loser and you're on the losing side. So let's jump over to the war in Ukraine. And who's winning that? And we'll tie this all together. Russia did not crush the Ukrainians like Putin thought they were going to. And now the world, who was against him before, is now really, really against Putin. So if you came out as a Putin supporter, how are you currently looking now? And this is the interesting story that we're going to get into today. Because, Dan, as you know, from the last couple of weeks, we've been talking here on, Putin's man in charge over there in the Ukraine staged a coup against Putin over the last few weeks. And that's been the weirdest thing I've ever had to report on. The coup has been shut down. However, if you're a Putin supporter out there, you have to admit that was pretty close. That was pretty darn close to the point where they brought tanks out into the middle of the street in Moscow. And, Putin found, a Russian rebellion on his doorstep, something that we could have never fathomed before. And it was pretty scary for the guy who claims that he's in complete control of his country and his people and his military, because this was the dude that's running that whole military campaign there in the Ukraine. So this week, Putin took it upon himself to address world leaders that support him at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the summit. He said via video link The solidarity, now I have to read this perfectly because I don't quite get a lot of it. The solidarity and high responsibility for the fate of the fatherland was clearly demonstrated by Russian political circles and the entire society by coming out as a united front against the attempted armed rebellion. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues from the SCO countries who have expressed support for the actions of the Russian leadership. Okay, so... Notwithstanding, they're also saying, he went on to say, all this thing, Russia, we're handling the sanctions pretty fine, yada, yada, yada. Do not worry. Everything is fine in Russia. Please keep up your support for me.
He actually had some popularity and supporters around the world that you wouldn't think would be supporting him during COVID. When the way the Russia was handling COVID, there were people that were kind of supporting and had some fans of Putin during that era, right? For a little while. I mean, I know a lot of people that were throwing flowers at him about the way they were handling COVID, right? But then, that.
I mean, the problem with places like Russia and North Korea, you never know what's true and what's not true that's coming out of there. I mean, the question I have to ask you, Dan, is if Putin is overthrown, like this came, pretty close, the closest I've ever seen to anybody overthrowing him. If somebody was able to throw him, where does this put countries like China and Iran and India and a bunch of those stand countries like Pakistan and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan? That would put them in a very precarious position. I mean, all of a sudden you've been supporting Putin this whole time, and then, now somebody has been able to either get some, radioactive poison in his tea, or get one of those, those umbrellas that they had, the old Soviet umbrellas where you walk up behind somebody and you stick them in the leg with the Soviet umbrella and the needle goes in their leg and it's got some kind of radioactive isotope that goes into your blood system and you die like 5 days later, a horrible death. Anyway, what if that happened? I mean, what would that mean to these other countries? I think, China is worried about its standing right now and the fact that, they're the ones that are doing trade, and so is India with Russia. And all of a sudden, Putin gets overthrown. And let's say he gets overthrown and the new guy that comes in is just another authoritarian leader. Or let's say the next guy that comes in is a pro-Western leader. Yeah. What would that do? I mean, the people that are currently, supporting the countries that are supporting Putin make up 40% of the global population.
Well, it's that whole analogy of the 9-headed Hydra. You cut one head off and another one grows. Yeah. Right. So that's really the concern. It's the same thing in North Korea as well. When the crazy man, the fat man is gone, well, what crazy snake poison is going to be replacing him?
His sister.
So, I mean, the concern is really, when you in a country like that, especially the way their leadership is set up, whoever takes over the helm, are they going to be even worse?
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's what I find is going to be interesting, because there is no person. That's right. We talked about this before, is who's going to take over for Putin if, let's say, he dies of this cancer that he has, or, for whatever reason, somebody was able to get through and get a bullet in the back of his head. Then who's next? And I think it's going to be a fight for power, because I think a lot of the leaders in Russia, they want to see him go. They do. I mean, a lot of the military leaders, they want to see him go, because look what's happening right now. I mean, let's just move forward just a little bit. The NATO summit, which is coming up in Lithuania, it's coming up next week. Something I did not expect is going to happen, this past week, because this thing that's coming up, our favorite guy here, Erdogan from Turkey, who's always been a Putin guy. He's always been a friend of Putin. He surprised everybody. And, he came up this week and he said, without a doubt, Ukraine deserves to be in NATO. And everyone's like, what? Erdogan? What happened to you? I mean, Erdogan, he just won the president, getting reelected by a very, very thin margin. But even President Zelensky in Ukraine was like, well, I'm very happy to hear that. Nobody expected that because Erdogan has been opposed to Sweden entering the NATO. He was even opposed to Finland. And now, I'm just saying, that it just seemed kind of odd that all of a sudden now he's switching teams. And I think this might have something to do. I could be wrong. I mean, we don't have Erdogan as a guest here on the World News Jam, but I'd like to ask him, does this have anything to do with the fact that there was just recently an uprising in Russia? And, maybe everybody's like, well, you know what? This might not be going as well as we thought. And just like in the Philippines, in the Philippines in politics, when you're standing behind a candidate and all of a sudden things look like it's not going to go so good for them, you immediately jump ship and go over to the winning guy.
Well, you definitely
let's move to the winning guy
because in the Philippines they shoot people.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't want to get into Philippine politics. I don't want to get shot. But anyway, so it's just interesting now that the NATO summit's coming up and they're going to what was Putin's whole reason for going into this war in the first place is because, well, we don't want NATO encroaching on Russia. Well, now NATO has 900 more square miles of border that it controls. So, and they're going to give it to Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's had the completely opposite effect of what his main concern was about. So it could have sounded like a valid concern, but
it's over now.
How he handled that.
That ship has sailed. There is no, saying, well, the reason for this war is we have to stop NATO. Well, this war has now catapulted NATO all across your border. And people are, that's why I said before, a lot of military leaders and a lot of official government people there in Russia, in the back of their mind are like, oh man, I wish somebody, it's not going to be me, but I wish somebody, would, sneak in and let's just do away with this guy and let's start all anew. And would the next guy be pro-authoritarian, let's kill anybody that says anything bad about me? Or would they be, a little bit more like some of the leaders at the end of the Soviet time where they kind of like, we're never going to beat the West. Let's just kind of, make friends with them in a way. And Gorbachev kind of tried to do that.
Well, it started out with diplomacy, and it should have continued with diplomacy, because there could have been a valid point there before he started, fortifying the borders with soldiers.
He made a mistake, and I think he thought for sure this was going to be easy. He was going to take it like he took Crimea. It was going to be no problem. And now I think it was this week. This week we hit the 500th day of the war. And what else happened this week? And the United States decided to give Ukraine cluster bombs. You know what cluster bombs are, Dan? That's some nasty stuff. That's those bombs where they drop the bomb and then it turns into a bunch of bomblets. I love that word, by the way, bomblets. And it turns into a bunch of bomblets and it spreads out over a huge area. And it's like just hiding grenades all over the place. And then those things blow up. A lot of people are against the United States doing that, giving them these cluster bombs, because cluster bombs, unfortunately, they do take out a huge area, and they will be a really horrible thing for the Russians to have to deal with. But they also, kill civilians.
Yeah,
that's it's just one of those things that happens.
Yeah, they're designed for only one purpose.
Really. You can't control where all these bomblets go. But the United States, they are sticking by it. They said, this is something that needs to happen, because at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but Putin cannot win this thing in any way.
No, he's already lost, actually. So.
He's lost. There's no way out of this. I don't know how he's going to get out of it.
Hopefully it's a good message for other tyrants that are, well, I don't want to mention the exact, country that's getting aggressive with another country, but
we know who you mean.
Yeah, we hope that sends a good message, at least a forewarning.
Yeah,
I think the unified front of ethical and moralistic people are stronger. Let's hope, and not really going to sit around and allow those things to happen. So
yeah, I know.
Hopefully, good message being sent out.
I think that, and there's quite a few. I mean, we're talking, Iran, we're talking North Korea, we're talking some African countries that, in the back, we're talking China. There's other countries that are like looking at this, going, you know what, you just can't beat the rest of the world, and eventually you're going to run out of a few things. You're going to run out of bullets. You're going to run out of money. You're going to run out of people. And how are you going to look? Then there's no way back. There's no way out of this. I mean, Putin's legacy is gone. He is a loser. He went into this war. He's now in the war. And now the United States is giving the Ukraine cluster bombs. And what is Putin going to do next? What is there to do? There's nothing left to do. What is he going to shoot off a nuclear weapon? I mean, that's over. I mean, nobody believes you anymore when you keep saying, well, maybe we have this nuclear weapon we could shoot off. And they realize that he's not going to do that. It's an empty threat. Maybe, he's not Kim Jong-un. But I think that they've got themselves in a point where now he's got to figure out an exit strategy because there's no choice. There's no choice. And the worst thing that he's going to have to do, and I can't believe I'm saying this, he's going to have to give up Crimea. And mark my word, on today's show, the 500th day of the war, that I think he's going to have to give up Crimea. And once he does that, then somebody's going to sneak in his beautiful palace there and put a bullet in the back of his head because, he can't live. They can't let him live.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. I think his reign is coming to an end.
Yeah, I think so.
And justifiably so. But this is what happens when you try to hold on and keep power for that long. Democracy does prevail. And hopefully the Russian people are the ones that we really need to worry about.
It needs to be the Russian people. The Russian people. They need to be the ones.
Can't speak out. I mean, I have to believe that the majority of the civilian people are not for this war, and so
I tend to agree.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
And even if they were at first, that patriotism is diminishing because they're finally beginning to see and realize that this guy is actually a lunatic. If
he. I mean, forget losing the Ukraine. If he loses the entire area and NATO is now all over his border, I think that he's kind of going to be done away with. And speaking of doing away with, there was one thing that came up this week that I was looking at, a story which I find absolutely fascinating. You know what, Dan? This kind of goes with the idea of poor Putin being killed. We're going to get a little morbid here, but you know what the most expensive real estate in the world is right now?
It's gravesites.
It's gravesites. How'd you know that, Dan? That's pretty good.
Sounds like it.
It's gravesites. It's true. I was reading this story, and I was just fascinated that the starting price of a square meter of a condo is now less expensive than a place to put your urn. There are resting places for ashes in some countries that are higher than the highest priced condos. In Hong Kong, their price of a spot to put your urn, it's the size of a shoebox, and they cost $53,000. There are places in Germany, some of them are $73,000. And if you want to put your whole family, They're everybody's shoebox in a family. It can cost you as much as $430,000. And if you compare that to the highest priced condo in the same country, it actually costs more to be dead than it does to be alive.
We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it. You thought life was expensive. Death is even more expensive.
Death is even more expensive. That there are places, there are fancy places in Hong Kong right now that will cost you $660,000 US. These super duper nice places in which your urn would be kept in an air conditioned marble room. Of course, you got the management fee and the upkeep fee. But if you want to live in style in the afterlife, you can, if you got the cash.
That's crazy.
I had to bring this up. Hong Kong, where space is limited anyway, so they can't have cemeteries there. And, Chinese people, they don't like to burn. They don't like to, some people, they take the ashes and they throw them out in the ocean, or they throw them somewhere. It's the best thing to do. But, Chinese people don't like to do that. They like to keep them. But I was so fascinated by this, Dan, that I had to look up the most expensive burial plots that there are. And at Forest Lawn in New York, $825,000. Woodlawn in the Bronx, $1.5 million for a burial plot. And Westwood, Los Angeles, $4.6 million if you want to get buried in style.
That's in Los Angeles. I don't know anybody that would want to be buried in Los Angeles, though.
So
you'd have to, I don't know. Who would want to get paid to get buried in Los Angeles?
You think about, the ashes that you want to be spread out in your space. The ashes in Hong Kong, it comes out to $12,500 per gram of ash. And since the average human body is about 7 pounds of ash.
Oh, but I do it by weight, which is kind of strange, isn't it?
Oh, no. Okay, now, no. This is what I was thinking ahead here that you can be buried in space if you want, and if you want to be buried in space, they will take you to space. You can take it for 12,500 grams per gram of ash, and they will spread your ashes in space. So that's another way of doing it. However, if you do it, and people have done it, it will cost you around $34 million to have them take your urn up to space, to the International Space Station, and throw your ashes out into space. So if you don't want to give any of your money to your kids or your relatives, and you just want to blow it all on taking your ashes to space, there is a way of doing it. Speaking...
NASA must be hurting for money, huh?
Hurting for money. They're always hurting for money. But speaking about white powdery substance, Dan, and I love to get on, the fact that we're talking about ash here. Last Sunday, there was a white powdery substance, and it was not ash. It was found in the White House, and a lot of hoopla, because, when you find a white powdery substance in the White House, it could be anthrax. Remember back in the old days of when they used to, anthrax things. It could be explosives, could be anthrax, but it was not explosives and it was not anthrax. Dan, it was cocaine. They found a bag of coke, a bag of blow there in the White House.
Oh no, Hunter Biden! What are we just talking about this?
And of course, everybody goes, well, it must be hunters, just like Dan just did. Of course, they had to evacuate the White House because it was right there at the executive mansion, right where Joe Biden lives. However, Joe Biden was not there. He was there. The family was vacationing somewhere else. But the conspiracy theories, have been flying all around because of the big C. The fact that, could it be hunters? Because, Hunter has a history of drug abuse, as we all know. But it was not. Hunter was nowhere near the White House. He's not been anywhere near the White House. Somebody just left the bag of blow, on the doorstep there.
You sure somebody didn't put that in a tennis ball like they do in the jails and they throw it over the gate? they stuff it in a tennis ball and they throw it over the gate.
You know, it turns out, Dan, that there have been presidents that have done cocaine in the White House. Franklin Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, one of the greatest presidents ever, one of the most well-known ones, had a sinus problem, and they used cocaine for his nasal swelling.
Back in the day, yeah.
Back in the day, man.
Come on, man.
In fact, they say that during the bombing of Pearl Harbor, FDR was doing some cocaine for his nose problems.
It wasn't contraband back then. It was medicinal.
It was during the Carter administration, Willie Nelson, he did some smoking weed up on the roof, and also supposedly Snoop Dogg also did a blunt during the Obama administration. Nobody knows if that's true or not, but people say
that would be the most believable, because we all know
the most believable. Snoop Dogg up on the roof of the White House smoking some weed, but not with Obama, just doing it on his own. But but speaking of some things that we need to be smoking weed to being able to hear, Trump is still in the news this week.
We can't get to it.
Surprise. Give me some weed right now. The question that Donald Trump needs to answer, as a lot of the Republicans do, it's a law. There is a law against attempting a coup. That is a U.S. government law. We know because, the number of people that have gone to jail after January 6th. If you attempt a coup, that's against the law. And a lot of times, they will call you on that. But what if you plan a coup? And this is the new, latest, greatest thing, is maybe you don't do the coup, but you're planning the coup. And so this week they're looking back at that coup back in 2020 when Trump made the claim that he was cheated in the election and somehow the votes were stolen from him and given to Biden, yada, yada, yada. And people, they took it to court 60 plus times. They lost in court every single time. A lot of those judges were Trump appointed judges. So they weren't going to win on the court. So at least, let's try something else. And so all the things that they, these Trump guys that they try to do, they lost every possible way. So instead they had this meeting. And in this meeting, this Giuliani and this crazy woman and the previous guy in the Trump administration, they all got around and they decided, you know what, let's stage our own coup. Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, Michael Flynn, they all got around and they said, you know what? Let's get the military in on this. Let's get the military to come in and take all the voting machines and we'll get them. We'll get martial law. We'll claim martial law across the whole country, and we'll just take back the election the way they do in other countries. And so in the middle of this meeting, the White House counsel walked in and they're like, who are you guys and why are you here and why are you talking to Donald Trump? And they're like, we have this idea. We're going to get the military. We're going to name this crazy woman, Sidney Powell, as a special counsel, and she'll be able to tell the military what to do, and they'll go and they'll just confiscate all the voting machines, and then we'll just declare Trump the winner. And the White House counsel was like, you people are insane. You need to get out of here. And there was this big fight. There was a big fight, and they almost went to blows. Supposedly they almost started a really big fight. And in the end, the White House counsel kind of got them not to do this, but it's the fact that that's what they were trying to do. And what they did instead was Trump called all his followers to come to the White House on January 6th. It will be wild. And then they did the riot, and that whole thing happened. But is it against the law to plan a coup? And so that's what's going on right now. And they got Giuliani, who just lost his law license this week, and now he's talking to investigators. And they got him to talk to the investigators who were investigating Trump on this thing called a profit session. I never even heard of this. And this is where you go in and you talk to investigators, but no matter what you say, they can't put you in jail. So that's what's happening this week.
That's right. That's That's the snitch clause.
The snitch clause. It just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And I just think it's funny that right now, maybe, they're trying to get people to flip on Trump. And the fact that they're bringing up this whole thing gets, because I was wondering, when they tried to do this before, when they tried to get the military to get involved, and then of course they found out that the military wasn't going to listen to them anyway. So the military, they do not have to listen to something that the president says that they deem is crazy. And this was deemed crazy. So we all kind of forgot about it. We thought, you know what? Trump gets away with so many things. He's going to get away with this. Well, it turns out that he might not get away with it. That they're saying now that if you try and plan a coup, you might be in some serious trouble. And so they're going after these people.
Define what a coup is, huh?
Yeah, no. I mean,
qualifies.
What qualifies as planning a coup? And if anything, Pluff, this to me, this is a coup. This is what they were doing. And if it wasn't for the White House counsel coming down there and saying, you people are nuts, you can't do this. You guys are crazy. So anyway, so that's part of what's going on in U.S. politics right now. But one of the things that I wanted to get your opinion on, Dan, and I think this is very important. The Republicans right now in the United States, they're doing an investigation because they run the Senate, they run the Congress now. So they're doing an investigation into Democrats and why the Democrats, over the time that the Democrats were in charge, were trying to manipulate social media, was telling places like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, you have to take down these posts that these people are putting up. You can't put these posts up. And people are going, well, wait a minute. Should the government be telling social media what they have to take down or what they don't like that people are putting up? And so they are making a law. They're trying to pass this law that stops government from telling places like Facebook what posts they can delete. Now, people in general are like, yeah, we don't want the government shutting down our posts. I mean, aren't you the same way? I mean, you don't want the government telling you what you can and can't post. I mean, but
we're in a new era right now of politics and social culture, where social media, think about that. Like 15, 20 years ago when we were here, we didn't have this kind of issue.
We didn't have this kind of thing.
But the power and the strength of social media is really what's in question here. It's really the big concern here because, we have influencers, we have all of these things right now, TikTok, everything. And so, I think as the power of social media continues to grow, the power of, the government and all of these people that we put in power, their power isn't as strong as it used to be. And I think it's a good thing, actually.
I mean, let me ask you this, Dan. Let me ask you, you start opening this spicy can of sardines, there's going to be some issues that are coming up. And, so you say, okay, President Trump told me to take bleach and I would get rid of COVID. So I took 2 cups of bleach and my COVID is gone. It's miraculously gone. If you took some bleach, hey, your COVID would be gone too. And you know what? In the United States, we got some really stupid people. I mean, part of our country is not very bright. So should the government be able to step in and say, hey, you know what, Facebook, we need to not put this up because this might hurt somebody?
Yeah. You want freedom, right? There is the fine line between how much freedom can you have.
Is that freedom of speech? Let me ask you this, Dan. It was not too long ago where Trump, they have been kind of pushing this violence without saying the word violence. But they posted, Donald Trump posted Barack Obama's private home address on social media. And so this past week, some guy was found right near Barack Obama's home with a van full of guns and ammunition. Gonna do what? And he was one of these guys that, supposedly he said on his social media thing, hey, I know where Obama lives. I'm gonna go. We got him surrounded now. I mean, there comes a point where I think that, and by the way, the Republicans are wrong in some respects where they said, well, the government, the government called up Facebook and they said, you can't post anything that we don't like, which is not true. All the Democrats were saying was, don't post stuff that's already against your rules. And we're just saying, hey, look, we found some things that are against your policies. Can you take this down? Such as things like Obama's home address. Should, people like, should Donald Trump be able to post, secrets about how the United States is going to take over Iran? I mean, there has to come a point.
That's not a really good example or analogy because, I mean, you're saying that posting up Obama's address, if somebody really wanted to get it, they could find that out without anybody posting that up. You could. That's not, I mean, does it make it easier? Sure. But I mean, and it's not even a Democrat-Republican issue over here because there's been tons of other things that's happened on that side as well that's just ridiculous, right? I mean, canceling people out and all of that. I mean, it's there. I don't think this is an issue of one side or the other right now. I mean, well, Dan, it's not going away.
Let me ask you. Okay, let me ask you the question before, because we're about to run out of time here. Should the government be allowed to call up Facebook and say, take down this post? We think that this is not good for people to read.
No, I don't. I mean, they can. I think they can. Are you saying that should they be able to authoritatively make them take it down, or should they be able to ask them? See, you're asking the question.
I know. Okay, yeah. You're right. There's two ways to look at this. Should they have the authority to tell them you have to take it down because we're the government, or we would like to take you down because we think that people are not smart enough to be able to know not to drink bleach.
Yeah. So those are the two. That's the fine line right there because, like, authoritatively. I mean, China does that now, doesn't it? All of these countries that we talk about,
China can take anything down.
We don't want to be. Then now we're doing it, and all of a sudden it's an outrage, right? So where do we go with that?
Well, anyway, speaking of the government taking things down, very soon the radio station is going to take us down because we are out of time. But Dan, thanks so much. We had such a great time today. Some very interesting, fun stories this week.
Philippines World Cup of pool. Johan Chua and James Aranis made history. World record, right?
Dan is promoting the fact that the Philippines won the World Championships. I should have made a bit more of a story about that, but I forgot about it.
And the most winningest country in the world.
Yes, Philippines' most winningest country. And we're talking about world records, so the Philippines now has that record. So we're very happy about that. And as for me and Dan, we will actually probably next week, remind me, Dan, we'll talk a little bit more about the Philippine records, especially in billiards. But for now, for me on the World News Jam, Eric Lecain and Dan Kang, we'll see everybody next week. So for us here at DCRJ and RJTV, everybody, please be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are